Hello, everybody. This is John Fenn with Church Without Walls International. Once again, bringing you something about discipleship and drawing you closer to the Lord today, I hope. Again, our website, if you haven't known it by now, it's cwowi.org. It stands for Church Without Walls International. So cwowi.org, and that'll get you to our website. You can sign up for my weekly thoughts, which is a weekly email that I put out, a short teaching. So I hope you'll take part of that. Today, talking about fuzzy edges and the seasons of life. You've noticed in the natural that seasons do not have well-defined edges. A winter day and a spring day can come practically back to back. You know, it can say on the calendar it's springtime, but you could have snow flurries. If you live in the northern hemisphere or far enough south, you can have snow flurries, even though on the calendar it says it's spring. And Ecclesiastes 3 talks about these things, and there's several points to bring out today because you may be in a season of life of transition. Oftentimes, the change of the seasons of on the calendar also lead to seasons of life. School ends, school starts. Those are different seasons, and it's rough sometimes changing. One of the things is it's interesting. Just by a study is that it says that it takes about 1 year when a person moves to another location. It takes about 1 year for them to totally adjust, sometimes up to 2 years. And I find that interesting because it goes with this theme here of fuzzy edges to the seasons. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says that there is to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And those three elements are brought out continually. There is a season, a time, and a purpose. Now it's interesting, a season and a time, because in Genesis 1:14, the Lord says of the heavens and of the moon and everything in particular, it says, let it be for signs. It's talking about the stars as well. Let it be for signs, seasons, days, and years. And the truth of the matter is, today in modern society, we move in minutes and hours. But God moves in seasons and months and days and years, while we move in hours and minutes. And so we want the Lord to continually do it now. And part of the struggle that we have when he gives us instructions or leadings is something in our spirit, is that he comes from the realm of the I am. He comes from the realm of eternity, from the realm where every day is present. He's the past, present, and the future all wrapped up into one. It's always all present for him. So when he communicates to us, it feels in our spirit like right now we have to do this, when in fact we have several steps in the natural to go through before we get to what he wants. But getting back to seasons, time, and purpose. Ecclesiastes 3:1 then launches into what was then borrowed as a song. To everything there is a season, a time to live, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up, etc., etc. So it's interesting. I'm not going to sing for you, folks. So it's interesting that in Ecclesiastes 3, he identifies seasons, times, and purpose. So know this, there's always a purpose to the seasons of life. In fact, Ecclesiastes 3:11, I think it is, says that the Lord makes every season beautiful in the fullness of its time. It's kind of like that summer can start, but the beauty of summer is really the fullness and the lushness of everything. And winter can start kind of messy and everything else, but the beauty of winter is that fresh snow that's fallen and the crisp winter air. And so everything has a beauty of its own self. So what happens is when a person makes a move, maybe they transition in life through a job, maybe they literally move and change addresses, things of that nature. What you have here is you have something that's not cut and dried. There's going to be a little bit of overlap there. And what the helpful part is, if you're in the midst of a transition, or if you see a transition coming, let's say in this autumn, if you're in the northern hemisphere, springtime in the southern hemisphere, but this coming autumn, when I look down the road a couple of months, and you say, I think something new is coming. I think there's some things happening in my life. Realize the words of Ecclesiastes 3:15, which says, that which has been is now, and that which is to be has already been, and God requires what is past. And in a nutshell, that's saying that the Lord is saying, wrap up everything you can in this current season before you jump into the next season, because you need to complete it. It needs to be beautiful in its completeness. And that's why Ecclesiastes 3:15 says that which has been is now, and God requires that from the past now, because like a typical situation, maybe somebody will say, "Oh, I'm in a different season of life," and they'll pick up and they'll move to another part of the country, but back in that season where they were in the first place, they left bills unpaid, they left relationships broken, they didn't make amends, they didn't do it in a complete or a whole way. And so it's difficult to move into the next season if you've left things undone in the previous season. So that fuzzy edges is there to where it's not a crisp, clear cut of like, okay, this is this season, this is this season. The reason there's overlap in part is so that the previous season can be made beautiful in its fullness. Now, the other thing is that when you are living in one season, you can see into the future, into the next season. Moses sent the spies on ahead to spy out the promised land. This has been something in our own lives. It seems like the Lord has worked within us. Before Barbara and I have moved, it's like the Lord has sent me to go ahead of time to kind of take a look-see, at where we might live and where we might rent a house or buy, or the schools or whatever the case is. It's like I made a trip ahead of time, kind of like the spies being sent into the promised land, by Joshua to spy out the land and then bring back a report. And you'll find a pattern in your own life where the Lord has done that for you. He will establish a pattern. When you look back over seasons of life that God has led, you'll be able to see certain patterns. Do you have cases where you've gone ahead? A pattern where you've collected information, where you've gathered information about where you're moving or what the next thing is. It could be a job, it could be a geographical change, whatever the case is. So know that there are fuzzy edges to it. Know that He intends you to complete the work completely, and not leave things undone in the previous season before you jump into the next. Because when you jump into the next season, you're just going to take your problems with you if you don't solve them and resolve them here in this season. In Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 through 23, it's the case of how the Lord moved Israel through the wilderness. And the way He would do that is they'd be camping in their tents, and then the cloud that was over the tabernacle would lift up. And that signal, when the cloud lifted up over the tabernacle, that was the signal for Israel to get ready. And what they would have to do is they'd have to round up their livestock. They'd have to get prepared to move. If they're living out of suitcases and sacks and boxes and stuff like that, they'd have to pack up and get ready to move, because the cloud had lifted up. It hadn't yet moved to the next season of life, but the cloud had lifted up, and that was the signal to get ready. What happens is, it happens in our lives that same way. And the way to know the cloud has moved or the cloud has lifted up in your area is when you're in a particular season and you don't have the grace for that season anymore. Things can happen in the natural, things can happen spiritually, but together when they combine, it's like, I don't have the grace to do this anymore. There has to be a change. And that is the sign that cloud has lifted up over the tabernacle and getting set to move, but it hasn't yet moved. And it's interesting that in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 2, it says that they used silver trumpets to blow, to signify when the cloud was lifted up, so to bring everyone's attention to the fact that the cloud has lifted up. Now, silver is the metal of righteousness in the Old Testament. So these silver trumpets were blown to say, hey, the cloud is lifted up. It's getting ready to move. They didn't know where they were moving. The edges of the season was funny. All they knew was, I don't have the grace for this anymore. The cloud is lifted up. We need to get set to move, but we're not sure where we're going. And one of the things he says in verse 9 is, when you blow those silver trumpets, do not sound an alarm. And that's good. It's, in other words, when the trumpets are blown, it's not an alarm like a panic thing. And what you'll find is the seasons change rightly in your life when the heavenly trumpet blows to signify to you, hey, the cloud is lifted up, it's about ready to move. It will not come as an alarm. It is done smoothly. It is done with a transition. It is done in peace. It is done in righteousness. And so this is my little summary this morning of fuzzy edges around the seasons of life. You can see season coming up maybe in a couple months, and you can feel that the cloud is lifted from your heart. You don't have the grace anymore, but wrap up the loose edges, do it in righteousness, move rightly, move as it should be, and realize that there is a purpose and a season and a time for everything under heaven. So accomplish that purpose and the Lord will be with you. Get everything done in the proper season as it should be done, and you'll have peace as you go into that next season. All right, hope this has been a blessing to you. Talk to you more next week.